The hull shuddered again, groaning under stress it was never meant to endure. A blue arc of plasma licked across the control panel and fizzled out, leaving a scorched streak against the pale metal. Captain Vetrax of the Solari expeditionary cruiser Tessalune leaned into the console, her 4 elongated fingers moving across the haptic interface faster than the eye could follow. "It's not responding," she muttered, her usually serene tone edged with tension. "Primary drive matrix is in cascade failure. Secondary is offline. Emergency thrusters are cycling but providing no thrust." The engineer, a squat, copper-skinned creature named Auric, extended a limb and tapped his diagnostic visor. "I've rerouted power 3 times. It's not a distribution failure. The engine core's fusion matrix is destabilized. It's broken." Vetrax turned slowly. "Define broken." Auric hesitated. "Beyond field repair. We need a dry dock, or a technician who understands this model's phase harmonics down to the capacitor lattice." They were drifting in high orbit above an unregistered blue planet. Their landing attempt aborted less than an hour ago after a sharp power drop. The planet hadn't been marked for contact, but the alternative was to wait for rescue in a dead ship with a failing life support cycle. That could take days, maybe weeks. Vetrax's elongated pupils narrowed. "Do we have the planetary linguistics files?" "Yes, local dialects decoded." "Primary language, English." She tapped her comms. "Initiate surface scan. Search for technologically literate species. Prioritize those with mechanical aptitude." Kellan Hart wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, the thick Arizona sun cooking the exposed skin on his neck. The old truck he'd been trying to restore since college sat stubbornly silent under the carport, half of its engine block laid out on a tarp in a constellation of greasy parts. He glanced toward the house. The front screen door banged gently in the breeze. No sign of neighbors. No one to see what he was about to do. He grabbed a coil of copper wire and leaned back into the engine bay, elbow deep in aluminum, steel, and rust. He didn't need schematics. He hadn't used them since he was 16. He could still remember the time he reassembled a V8 from memory after his uncle tossed the manual into a bonfire during a drunken bet. That's when he heard it. A humming sound, low and unnatural, like someone dragging a cello bow across a steel girder. It grew louder, pulsing through the air. The hairs on his arm stood up. He stepped out from under the carport, squinting into the sky. A silver wedge, smooth and silent, descended from the clouds with a grace that made his knees lock. It wasn't a drone. It wasn't any aircraft he'd seen, and he'd worked Air Force contracts for 6 years before retiring to this quiet, dusty corner of the state. The wedge hovered just above the mesquite line, then slowly dropped behind the hill. He stared for a moment. Then, without a word, he grabbed his old canvas pack, tossed in his multi-tool, a pair of gloves and the small flashlight he kept for night work, and started walking. The Tessalune had buried itself halfway into a dry riverbed, its nose tilted at a precarious angle. Dust still hung thick in the air. Emergency beacons blinked weakly on its hull. Kellan crouched behind a rock formation, watching. His first thought was military test flight. His second thought was, no way in hell. A panel hissed open on the side of the ship and a figure stepped out. It stood upright, maybe 6 feet tall, its skin a pale opalescent sheen. Its eyes scanned the terrain, then locked on him. Kellan froze. The alien lifted a small device, tapped it once, then spoke. "Do you have knowledge of drive systems, mechanical constructs?" Kellan blinked. "You mean like engines?" "Yes." He stepped out from behind the rock, cautiously. "I know a thing or two." Inside the ship, the air was cooler and smelled faintly of ozone and something like cinnamon. Auric stood over a wide engine module, gesturing frantically. "This is the fusion matrix housing," he said. "The core's lattice interface is fractured. The containment field is fluctuating. I've stabilized it for now, but if we try to power up, it'll collapse." Kellan approached the array, eyes scanning the intricate lines of tubing, housing, and what looked like a triple-looped capacitor ring. "What's the power source?" he asked. "A tritium-deuterium fusion core stabilized by a quantum lattice. The harmonics are maintained by 3-phase oscillators calibrated to—" Okay, Kellan interrupted. So, high-frequency resonance tuning. And you lost the harmonic balance. Orek looked at him in surprise. You understand, Kellan grunted. Well, not the alien physics part, but I used to rebuild magnetic suspension systems for rail networks. The principle's not that different if you strip away the Sci-Fi. He reached for a nearby panel. Can I open this? Vetrax nodded once. You may. He unlatched the casing, revealing a complex network of coils and what he assumed were cooling rods. Most of it was fried, blackened at the edges. Do you have replacement parts? No, Orek said. We carry spares for standard components, but not for the lattice interface. It was custom fitted before the mission. Kellan tapped his fingers on the side of the housing. Then we'll need to rebuild it, from scratch. Orek's mouth fell open. You don't have the schematics. Even if you did, we lack the tools. Kellan stepped back. I just need a flat workspace, some raw materials, and time, and I'll need to take apart one of your auxiliary power runners. It's got the kind of alloy I need. Vetrax stared at him for a long moment. You're certain? No, Kellan admitted, but sitting here waiting to suffocate doesn't sound like a better plan. The next 8 hours were a blur of work. Kellan stripped down a power runner and used its internal wiring to rebraid a new lattice stabilizer. Without proper tools, he used a combination of ship-grade adhesives and precision soldering with a plasma cutter set to its lowest setting. Twice, he burned his fingertips. Once, he nearly dropped a crucial coil when a tremor rippled through the ship and knocked his balance off. He didn't eat. He drank only when Orek reminded him. His hands shook from fatigue by the time he reassembled the interface and fitted it back into the housing. Try it now, he said, voice hoarse. Orek powered up the core. The engine hummed, then sputtered. The lights flickered but held. A slow, rising tone filled the chamber as the stabilizer looped into sync. The hum settled into a steady rhythm. Vetrax's eyes widened. It's working. Kellan slumped to the floor, breathing hard. Don't push it too hard. You've got maybe 100 hours of runtime before the adhesives degrade. You'll want to get it rebuilt properly once you're home. Orek crouched beside him. You built a quantum stabilizer from memory in less than a day. Kellan chuckled weakly. Nah, I built a temporary patch using duct tape logic and stubbornness. Memory just kept me from screwing it up worse. Vetrax looked at him. Why did you help us? Kellan leaned his head back against the bulkhead. Because you asked, and because I've spent the last 5 years fixing things no one thought were worth fixing. It felt good to do something that mattered. Outside, the sun dipped low behind the ridge. The hull lights of the Tessalune glowed softly against the dust. Inside, Kellan's breathing slowed. His hands were swollen, fingers blistered. His back throbbed from hunching over, and his left wrist had a dull ache that he hoped wasn't serious. He didn't care. The engine was running. The ship might fly again, and for now, that was enough. By early morning, the air inside the ship had grown heavy with the tang of ionized metal and recycled breath. Kellan sat on the grated floor of the maintenance bay, one leg stretched out in front of him, the other bent awkwardly under his frame. A thin line of dried blood traced down his wrist, where a shard of casing had sliced him during the rebuild. He peeled the edge of his sweat-stuck shirt away from his side and winced as the fabric tugged at a bruise he didn't remember earning. You require medical attention, Vetrax said from the corridor, observing him with unreadable expression. Her pupils had contracted to narrow slits in the ship's internal lighting. Kellan didn't look up. I'll need some gauze, maybe antiseptic. I'm not going to keel over. Orek stepped forward, holding a small canister with a nozzle. This compound seals dermal lacerations and neutralizes infection vectors. Will it suffice? Kellan eyed it warily. That thing gonna burn like hell. It neutralizes through molecular bonding. I do not believe it will. Burn like hell. Well, that's comforting. He took the canister, turned it over once in his hand, then sprayed a short burst into the open cut. It fizzed slightly. He clenched his jaw. Does it sting? Not as bad as lemon juice in a paper cut, but close. Orek tilted his head. Why would one apply citrus to an open wound? No one does it on purpose. It's just one of those things that teaches you not to be stupid twice. Vetrax stepped into the bay, the tips of her boots clicking lightly against the metal. Your injuries are minor, but your coordination is deteriorating. You need rest. Kellan reached for the wall to steady himself. I'll sleep after I check the auxiliary coolant loop. If that thing overheats, your makeshift stabilizer's gonna melt into a very expensive puddle. You performed triage under duress without schematics on technology that does not exist on your planet. Yeah, and I'm not trying to find out what happens if I also sleep through a coolant failure. Vetrax folded her arms, each movement deliberate. Your species appears to reject self-preservation in favor of stubborn maintenance rituals. We call it being thorough. No, you call it being thorough, I call it illogical. Kellan gave a tired grin. You're not wrong, still gonna do it though. He limped to the access panel near the starboard strut, crouched, and pried it open. A soft hiss met his ears, steam venting from a pressure line. He reached in with a gloved hand and adjusted the clamp holding the thermal regulator in place. The temperature gauge steadied. That'll hold for a while, he muttered, pulling back. But your regulator's got a hairline crack. Probably from the crash, you'll need a replacement before you hit full thrust. Auric consulted his display. There is a spare in the equipment vault, Category D storage. Then we're in luck. Not precisely. The vault is sealed. Impact warped the alignment rails. It cannot be opened manually. Kellan leaned back against the wall, breathing deeply. All right, let me see it. We have already assessed. You said that earlier. Don't care, show me anyway. The three of them descended into the belly of the ship, where the lights flickered periodically, casting brief shadows across the curved walls. The vault door was a thick slab of layered alloy, dented inward on one edge. Its locking mechanism blinked in a confused rhythm, caught in a loop it couldn't resolve. Kellan crouched again, swearing under his breath as his knees popped. You got a crowbar, Vetrax blinked. What is a crowbar? Never mind, I'll improvise. He took a length of conduit from a nearby wall panel, wedged it into the seam of the door, and leaned into it. The metal groaned but held. He repositioned, twisted, and shifted his weight. Nothing. He stood up, wiped his forehead, and walked a few steps away, rolling his shoulders. Then, without warning, he turned and slammed his heel into the edge of the door. The whole frame shuddered. A bolt ejected with a loud ping and clattered to the floor. Auric tilted his head. Why did striking it with your lower limb succeed where applied leverage failed? Sometimes you just gotta hit things in the right spot, Kellan said, rubbing his ankle. Call it instinct. They pried the door open the rest of the way and retrieved the spare regulator. Kellan inspected it, nodding. This'll work, but I'm gonna need at least 2 hours to install it. Maybe 3 if the interface ports are warped. Vetrax narrowed her eyes. You will rest first. You keep saying that like it's a command. It is. He opened his mouth to argue but stopped. His head was beginning to swim and the inside of his mouth tasted like metal. Fine, 1 hour. Then I get back to it. You will take 2. He gave a short nod, not because he agreed, but because he couldn't conjure the energy to argue. Auric guided him to a low bench in the corner of the corridor and offered a hydration packet. Drink this. It contains nutrient compounds compatible with your biology. Kellan took a sip. It tasted like warm watermelon rind dipped in salt, but it stayed down. He leaned back and closed his eyes. The hum of the ship faded into the background as his pulse settled. His fingers twitched involuntarily, residual tension from hours of work. The next time he opened his eyes, it was dusk again outside. He sat up slowly. His spine protested. His right hand felt stiff, the knuckles swollen. He flexed them, wincing. You returned to consciousness earlier than expected, Vetrax said, appearing from the corridor junction. Didn't mean to fall asleep that long. Your body made the decision for you. Yeah, he muttered, standing with effort. I hate when it does that. He returned to the maintenance bay, regulator under one arm, and spent the next 3 hours crawling through tight passages, unscrewing warped brackets, and coaxing stubborn fittings to accept the new unit. Auric assisted by handing tools and modulating the internal pressure systems. At one point, a coolant valve refused to seat properly. Kellan wrapped it in a thermal barrier sleeve, then anchored it with a bracket meant for something entirely different. You are violating 3 containment protocols, Auric warned. Yeah, well, 2 of them don't apply on Earth, and the 3rd one doesn't matter if we don't get this thing space-worthy. By the time he secured the last bolt and calibrated the regulator's output, The artificial lights overhead had dimmed to night cycle. His shirt was soaked through and his forearms bore fresh scrapes. He stepped back and exhaled. That's it, she's patched. Vetrax pressed a sequence into the control panel. The drive core spun up slowly, then stabilized. The hum was smoother now, deeper and steadier. You have restored functionality beyond projected parameters, she said. Kellan leaned against the wall and gave a tired laugh. You sound almost impressed. I am not certain whether to be impressed or concerned. Join the club. Auric approached, holding out a flat rectangular object. This contains a diagnostic copy of all systems you interfaced with. It may be of use should your species ever develop compatible technology. Kellan took it. Thanks, I'll keep it away from the government. You consider your own institutions a threat? No. I consider bureaucracy a death sentence for progress. Vetrax studied him. Your approach to problem solving is inherently chaotic. And yet here we are, indeed. She paused. You have our gratitude and our curiosity. Kellan rubbed his temple. Curiosity's fine, just don't abduct me. That was never our intent. Glad to hear it. He turned toward the exit hatch, legs stiff, head foggy. I'm going to need a week to recover, preferably with a cold beer and no glowing engine parts. Would you like an escort back to your dwelling? Nah, I'll walk. Gives me time to decide whether I dreamed all of this. You did not, didn't think so. As he stepped out into the cooling desert air, the stars above blinked like distant circuitry. The ship behind him hummed quietly, alive again. He didn't look back. Not because he wasn't curious, but because he knew if he did, he'd start thinking about what else he could fix. And some things were better left for another day. Kellan stirred awake to the sound of something gently tapping metal, rhythmic and deliberate. He blinked against the low light, trying to place where he was. A moment passed before he remembered. The alien ship, the cracked regulator, the improvised stabilizer he'd pulled together in a haze of exhaustion and stubborn instinct. He sat up slowly, spine stiff, right shoulder throbbing from the hours spent wedged in crawl spaces. His fingers felt clumsy, swollen from overuse. He flexed them one at a time, grimacing as his thumb joint popped. The tapping continued somewhere near the entry corridor. He pushed himself to his feet and limped toward it, barefoot on the smooth alloy floor. Auric stood at a console, tapping a stylus rapidly against a display screen that projected a rotating schematic in amber light. You're awake, Auric said without turning. Your circulatory markers showed elevated cortisol during sleep. I suspected you would regain consciousness soon. Kellan rubbed the side of his face. You watching me sleep, only for health metrics. Your species demonstrates volatile recovery patterns. You could have just waited for me to wake up and ask how I was feeling. Subjective self-assessment lacks reliability. He moved toward the screen, scanning the schematic. It wasn't the engine core. What's that? The atmospheric shielding panel. It sustained microfissures during your regulator installation. We're attempting to reinforce it before departure. Kellan leaned in, squinting. That's near the propulsion hull, right? If that thing flakes off mid-flight, you're not just losing shielding, you're venting plasma backwash into your auxiliary systems. Auric paused. That risk had not been quantified yet. Well, I'm quantifying it now. You got any more of that alloy plating from the power runner I dismantled? One sheet remains, but it has been repurposed as a temporary access ramp. Kellan coughed a dry laugh. Guess I'll be making a trade. He walked back to the rear hatch, found the makeshift ramp thin, dented but usable, and detached it with a grunt. The strain shot through his lower back like a fuse being lit. He staggered upright, breathing through the pain, and carried the metal to the central bay. You'll need to layer this over the fractured section, but it can't be welded directly. That'll cause heat distortion and you'll lose integrity at launch. Auric handed him a precision tool. Can you apply the fix? Yeah. But I'm going to need you to hold the panel in place while I secure the brackets. I'm not exactly ambidextrous right now. They moved together in silence to the propulsion chamber. The atmosphere felt heavier here, the air thick with ionized particles left behind by earlier system tests. Kellan climbed onto the scaffold, bracing his knees. Auric passed him the panel and he maneuvered it gently into place, aligning edges to the schematics in his head. He drilled the first 2 brackets in without issue. The third fought him. He had to lean at an awkward angle, one hand gripping the tool tight while his other arm trembled with fatigue. "You are not well enough for this," Auric said, watching his fingers slip off the mount. "Let me finish this one thing," Kellan muttered through clenched teeth. "Then I'll rest. You said that yesterday. And I meant it. Today's a new day. You are bleeding again." Kellan looked down. His forearm had reopened along the same scrape from before. A thin red line snaked toward his wrist. "Damn it." Auric tapped the console. "I will retrieve another sealant canister. Don't bother." He wrapped the edge of his sleeve around the wound and tied it tight. "I'll patch it later. Just need to finish this bracket before my hand gives out." He adjusted the angle, drilled slower, careful not to force the metal. The bracket seated with a satisfying click. He exhaled and dropped his arm. "Done. You will rest now. I'll lie down. Can't promise anything beyond that." Back in the central corridor, Vetrax awaited him, arms clasped behind her back. Her gaze passed over him like a scanner. "You continue to jeopardize your motor function and circulatory stability. Are you incapable of restraint?" "I'm capable. I just ignore it when something needs doing." She tilted her head. "You are unfit for further mechanical labor. No argument here." She turned and gestured down a secondary passage. "Follow me." He didn't ask questions. Curiosity carried him through the narrow corridor, past compartments he hadn't seen before. They entered a room with lower ceilings and soft blue lighting that pulsed gently. In the center, a cylindrical pod rose from the floor, its surface embedded with glowing filaments. "Medical regeneration chamber," Vetrax said. "Designed for physiological restoration." That a fancy way of saying it's a hospital bed. It is not a bed. It is a cellular realignment system. It will address the inflammation in your joints and repair the dermal damage to your extremities. "Will it knock me out?" "Not unless you request sedation." "Good, I'd rather stay conscious. I don't like surprises." She pressed a sequence on the nearby panel. The chamber opened with a quiet hiss. Kellan stepped in, eyeing the interior. It was warm, but not uncomfortably so. The surface adjusted to his weight, supporting him in a semi-reclined position. Thin bands extended over his arms and chest. No needles. No pain. Just a gentle pressure and a soft hum as the chamber sealed. "This is weird," he said. "Your vitals are stabilizing already." "How long's this gonna take?" 17 minutes. He leaned back and let the hum wash over him. The soreness in his fingers dulled. The tightness in his shoulder ebbed. Even the throbbing in his back eased into a manageable ache. "This is cheating," he said quietly. "It is called efficiency." When the chamber opened again, he stepped out and rotated his arm experimentally. The stiffness was almost gone. The cut on his wrist had faded to a pink line. "I feel like I just slept for a week." "You were treated for muscular strain, tissue fatigue, and minor blood loss. You consumed less than adequate nutrition over a 48-hour period." "I'm not great with meal planning." Auric reappeared, carrying a small container. "We prepared a compatible nutrient composition. It resembles your dietary preference for savory proteins." Kellan opened the lid. Inside was a pale, gelatinous cube that shimmered faintly. "It doesn't look like chicken." "It contains equivalent amino acid structures." He took a bite. It had the texture of firm tofu but the flavor of roasted mushrooms and salt. "Not bad." "All right," he said, chewing. "You've got a working engine, your shielding's patched, and I'm not falling apart anymore. I'd call that a win." Vetrax stepped forward. "We are preparing for departure. Our mission requires us to rejoin the fleet within the next solar rotation." "You'll make it, with the repairs you've implemented." "Yes," Kellan nodded. "Good." Silence fell, not awkward, just full of things neither side needed to say. Finally, Auric extended a small, palm-sized device. "This is a fabrication key. It contains the synthesis pattern for the stabilizer you constructed, as well as the modifications you made. We felt it appropriate to leave a copy." He took it. "Thanks, I'll keep it somewhere safe. Just in case someone else tries to build one of these things without checking the manual." Vetrax held out a hand. Not a gesture he'd seen from her before. He took it cautiously. Her grip was firm, cool, and brief. "You are resourceful," she said. "And unpredictable. I get that a lot." She turned without further word and walked toward the entry ramp, which now extended smoothly from the side bay. Auric followed. Kellan stepped outside, watching as the ship powered up. The hull shimmered under the pale gold of morning light. No dust clouds this time. Just a low-frequency vibration through the ground as the vessel lifted, steady and sure. It rose above the ridge line, paused for a moment, and then accelerated into the sky, vanishing without a trace. Kellan stood alone in the silence that followed, the desert calm and still. He turned, walked back toward his house, and muttered to himself, "I should probably finish that truck now."